I always wanted to serve on a jury.
I'm really super excited to be here, so I really appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Creating this whole trial, Daddy.
I want to give a big shout out to the 13th Jury Podcast and Brandy.
Yeah, I applaud you guys. Keep doing what you're doing.
That every time you run into Phil Barber, you should reach for it.
And then I just looked to the jury, and it's sort of like, look.
I was in the eye of the storm, and you guys were watching the storm.
Hey, if your porter works, come pop in and say, hey, we'll have some coffee.
You are a ray of sunshine, and I love what you've done with your YouTube channel.
Hello, Miss Brandy.
How are you? I am so glad you are here.
Well, I really appreciate the invite, and I told you we would make it happen, and we did.
Yes, I am so excited. I am so thankful. I have so many questions. This is one of those cases where I am not an expert, and I talk to, different people, and different things make sense and different things don't. And this is one where so many things don't. And I am just really excited to hear some of your, your input on everything.
Well, Brandy, from a lay perspective, not exactly knowing everything that those participants know, it's back and forth. This case really it got to me too, and usually that doesn't happen, but one day you feel this way and tomorrow there's another turn, and no, I don't feel that way anymore. So it's really a complicated issue, and I believe that's why it shook everybody's interest.
Yeah. Oh, they're saying your microphone is low. Can you turn it up a little bit? We want to make sure we hear everything you say.
Yeah, let's see what we can do.
I want to make sure we hear everything you say.
Well, I don't know that it's giving me that option. It's just giving me the on-off option.
Let me see if I have a way to... I don't think I can turn... Oh, Terry said it's better.
Better?
Oh, yeah. People are saying it's already better. So, okay.
Okay.
We'll go with it.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, before we even get into the expert in Reconstruction stuff, I am curious, just with the rest of this case and the craziness of it, is there anything... I know we've talked about, like, butt dials and stuff like that, but is there anything else in this case aside from just the expert stuff that has stood out to you as just being just crazy or different or weird, or anything that has stood out to you?
Well, Brandy, I always try to take the high road, and I try not to kick anybody in the knee, but it just an apparent lack of preparation from law enforcement. They didn't even seem sure about the results they were presenting to the court. And they can be wrong just like I can be wrong. But if you're not sure of it, then you really need to take a back door. And I don't know if the blame lays on the prosecutor, the agency, the individual officers, or all of the above. But I just thought the lack of preparation and just too many different angles, and somebody had to think of this. Somebody had to review this case, and I just don't think they were there. And guilt or innocence doesn't even matter if the process isn't fair. And you and I have talked about that on the phone, and I don't believe I can even get to the guilt or innocence part because everything else was so tainted. And if they truly are going to try this thing again, which they didn't ask my opinion, but I'm gonna give it to them. I probably would not until I strengthen some things. But if they're truly going to try this thing again, they have got to be at least, one band, one song. And I don't know that it can be salvaged.
Yeah, one of the great questions that we had from one of the people who sent, we had some people that sent in questions in, and one of the great ones was the training and education that troopers should be getting to conduct a proper investigation. And I think that really was highlighted in this case, especially because the training and education that Trooper Paul had, if this had been just some kind of typical, everyday collision that pretty much they're all the same and they all end up the same this way, then maybe that would be one thing. But his lack of knowledge about all of this and trying to explain how this is different, and the reasoning that he gave and the explanations that he gave still didn't make everything make sense. I think when you have that compared to the ARCA experts, it was such a, it highlighted really his lack of knowledge. And I think it really brought that into light. So what could you even do about that? The training and education that is involved. I mean, I know that they can't, all have ARCA experts.
No, I agree, Ms. Brandy, and I think that has a lot to do with the confidence level. And, I appreciate you feeding me some of this ahead of time so I could do a little bit of research. But a lot of state agencies, especially now, they get these youngsters in here, and obviously I've got a year or two on this trooper, but they get them in and they give them the bare minimum. And, accredited training is always better because you've got CALEA and some other agencies behind that kind of strengthen it a little bit. And certainly some wound pathology. I know I have cases involving state agencies, specifically Highway Patrol, and the basic things are neglected for the geometric equations and algebra equations. They skip the basic things. Black powder, fingerprint powder is cheap. And you could always try to find a latent if you're trying to identify, the driver of a vehicle if someone has been ejected. And I've seen it time and time again, and I'm involved in one right now for the same purpose. They use the science and they use all the gizmos and the computer programs, but they lack the very basic things that crime scene investigators taught, day 2 of CSI 101. And I believe the accredited training that someone stands behind, and you have to get it consistent across the board. And the biggest thing is a peer-reviewed process, because if you are doing a peer-reviewed process, most of your accredited laboratories across this country, you're reviewed by 1, 2, or maybe even more, maybe a committee. If you find those errors, and look, I can't say this is, my opinion just because I say so. You have to be able to back that up with something. And we saw that in another trial that you and I were somewhat part of. They said, who reviewed this evidence? Well, I don't need anyone to review it. I own the company. That's not a good answer. And it's not scientifically sound. And I might not have found everything that, we all question, but certainly we would have straightened some things up, or maybe even eliminated some pieces of evidence that really are going to cause you more headache than they're worth.
Yeah. And, one of the things that was really frustrating about some of his answers is he said when they were asking about the phone being found under him and how would he have held on to the phone and the cup, if they were both found near him, and he couldn't give answers to this. All he could say was it just does, or it just is. And that's really frustrating to hear, because when you have the experts up there, they're supposed to be able to give you more than what you could know as a layperson, and that's not an expert type answer. So that was one of the things that was really frustrating watching him.
The part that got me, and I didn't watch the entire trial, but I tried to hit the highlights, is, your arm, his arm was out and he was sideswiped, and that you end up with a broken arm. And probably part of that testimony was the only accurate part that, and I'll preface it with this: I don't question the mechanics of a car wreck because I don't do that part. I take a known and an unknown, and I tell you where they come from, and I try to corroborate something that you already have. But it seems to me a broken arm wouldn't have got us to where we're at now. So the part about his arm out, we spoke about this months ago when this thing first kicked off. I definitely do not believe that's the way it happened. But and maybe a peer review process would have said, would have told him that that's not good. We've got to go back to the drawing board and figure out what really happened, because that's not accurate.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I thought was interesting too, because when they were talking about his arm being out, and he said that that's how that dent could come in the car, but then he says that the glass, he would have held on to the glass and it traveled with him. If you were hit hard enough to have your arm, if your arm's out and you're hit hard enough to dent the car, how would you have held on to the glass as you're projected however many feet forward? It just, none of it made sense.
Certainly not. And if that car backed up as far as they say it did, well, my hands are going to be empty to start with, because I'm going to try to push off the car unless I didn't see it. And if I didn't see it, what would the purpose of my arm? Why would my arm be out? So, I mean, it's just a lot of theories. And then when they probed them on it and tried to dig a little bit deeper, they didn't have answers. And I'm not saying make those answers up, but you have to think from every direction when you're doing your trial prep. And I just don't think that was here.
Yeah, I agree. I want to talk. I'm going to turn my air off so I can make sure that we not too loud. I want to ask you about the side swipe. So the entire theory of Trooper Paul's whole shebang is all based on this being a side swipe. So the problem with that is that the ARCA experts are saying that a side swipe would not have enough impact to send him that far out. What are your thoughts on that? Is the side swipe thing a possibility, or what are your thoughts on that?
As I mentioned, I think that is about the most accurate part I saw of the trooper's testimony. If you were sideswiped in a low impact, low speed incident, you would turn counterclockwise, or depending on which side of the car you were on and which way you were facing. But in this scenario, I believe you would turn counterclockwise. But you would not have the injuries you have here. And certainly that plastic tail lens would not create those injuries on the victim's arm. So, a little bit of accuracy and theory there, but we talked about it earlier. If you're hit below that midline, of course, you're going to be under the vehicle. If you're hit about midway, you're going to have those two collisions that we talked about. The vehicle hits you, and then your body hits the vehicle. And then, of course, if you're up high, you're going to see what we typically see, where you're thrust into the air or you cartwheel down the road if the driver of the vehicle can stop in time. And that's it. That's physics. That doesn't change.
Right.
So this victim succumbed to a sideswipe of that type. And I just don't think you could have the speed or the force. This is a big guy. Yeah. And I don't think the force would have been enough to eject him, 20 feet or so. I just don't think. And they never provided any theory or any possibility that maybe the victim was not completely killed in this collision and he wandered off or tried to get help and walked off and then succumbed to the injuries and the cold. And I'm not saying that happened. Please, people in TV land, I didn't say that, but I'm saying they never ever once that I saw even explored that opportunity. They were stuck on one theory, and that was it. That was the way it was going to be.
Right. And the taillight shattering, that's another thing that you and I have talked about that before, because before they even came up with, even before trial, you and I talked about that, and you said, you know, you had never seen a plastic lens create that kind of abrasion or injury on an arm. So they said a couple different things here that I thought were really interesting. He said that the taillight shattered when hitting the arm, and then as the car continued, the light busted, and that caused the abrasions. And they pointed to that he called it the dimples on that part of the taillight, and said that the dimples, you know, could have caused the patterned abrasions. I know you said that you've never seen plastic do that. Can you talk about that?
Miss Brandy, I stick to my original. You know, we spoke about that earlier. If it's not under that vehicle, minus the damage, any damage to the bumper or in the area of impact on that vehicle, I was thinking chassis. I said, surely in this trial, we're going to see where underneath, you know, they might have been hiding it or whatever, but we're going to find something underneath, then nothing. So if it's not that, it has to be in the area. It's got to be in the area where the victim fell. It's got to be on the ground. It's got to be some appendage of the vehicle. I don't see it from the light. I'm not saying it's not possible, because, you know, maybe that's something an engineer could tell you. And in this case, they had a very well-established engineering and crash firm, and obviously they said it didn't happen that way too. So, you know, I was waiting on the big scientific giveaway, and it never came. And actually, some of your viewers, I was keeping up with it on Twitter a little bit, and some of them had some great shots of the undercarriage of some vehicles. And I'm like, well, that could do it. That could do it. And I just had one case like that in my whole career that I remember, and it resembled a bite mark on a deceased elderly male. And what it actually was, it was the ball joint on the drive shaft. And what looked like a bite mark, it pinched the skin when the vehicle went over him and actually sucked the skin up and made it appear to be a bite mark. So I'm going to stick to my original theory. If it's not under that vehicle and it's not in the area where they found the deceased, then this whole prosecution had some problems. And they can't convince me if they didn't at least come up with a theory for that other than the tail lens did it. Because number one, if you look at the size of the victim's arm, that is too much area for a tail light. So where did all the other injuries, lacerations come from, abrasions come from? And that doesn't do it. The tail light thing doesn't do it for me.
Yeah. And I remembered when we had talked about this before, that you said that that would need to be if the prosecution couldn't find somewhere under the car or in the landing spot to explain that they were going to have problems. And that's, so when we were talking, or when we were listening to it during trial, and I heard that, I was like, oh yes, Dr. Kinsey said that. He said that it was going to, you know, if they couldn't explain it that way, then it was going to be problematic. And it exactly was. And so when the ARCA experts got up and they were saying the exact same thing as you did, I was like, well, Dr. Kinsey already said that, but.
Well, you know, mine was a WAG. That's a wild guess, but you know, they're trained in that part, but it's just basic wound pathology, and you have to know a little bit about the injuries. And like I said a long time ago, I can certainly be wrong, but I've never seen any kind of injury like that caused by a tail lens. I just haven't seen it.
Yeah. What about the head injuries? So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, he kind of went back and forth. Like he said that the head injury could be from hitting his head on the curb, but then that doesn't make sense if he hit his head on the curb, because he said that he was projected back into the left. And then they said that he could have hit his head on the frozen ground. And then the ARCA expert was like, well, that's not really how it works. You have to test that. So the head injuries being from frozen ground, have you ever had any kind of cases that you've done where you've had to look at anything like that?
Ms. Brandy, I've only worked one case in the ice, and I did have a suicide where someone died by suicide in that ice storm. But you know, we don't have a lot of ice in our area.
Right.
I don't know if it was the curb. If he was located at the curb, I would have a lot easier time believing that. Or as I mentioned earlier, if someone could provide some type of corroborated evidence that he got up, you know, Officer O'Keefe got up and walked off. Yeah, but I don't think so. And the medical professionals should know the difference, you know, in the different concussions. Of course, that's way beyond my scope, but you deal with it a lot. And I think it also goes back with damage to the vehicle. So if it's not the curb and there's no damage to the vehicle, then where did it come from? And I'm certainly not suggesting a fight or whatever. I realize that, you know, conspiracies do happen. And you and I were texting about one earlier, and just a big old mess. But generally, they are interagency. Generally, it's not involving several agencies. And, you know, you got the medical examiner, coroners, local, then you got, you know, their big metropolitan police department. And then certainly the crime lab would have to be involved. So I'm certainly not saying it's a conspiracy. It's negligence. It's lack of preparation. It's certainly probably, you know, running somebody through the ringer for something that couldn't be proven. And that gives me a moral and an integrity issue also. So, you know, I'm not saying conspiracy. I'm not saying it's not, because it has happened. But I don't think they even needed that in this case. I think they could have tore up the physical evidence, and she definitely had great representation.
And that is one thing that you and I have talked about before. I'm hearing feedback. Is that me? I hear my own voice. I don't know if y'all hear that. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just crazy. One thing that you and I had talked about before was trying to make this work. Having prosecutors or, you know, troopers or whoever that is trying to make something work, and the corners that they'll cut to do that, and the like you said, like the moral shortcuts, I guess, that you've had experience with that, right? You've told me about a little bit of that.
I have testified I think a dozen times since Murdoch in 3 different states. And I've actually seen it now. And a year and a half ago, you would have had to punch me in my nose to believe that prosecutors, now I'm going to go on the record and say it's none I've worked for, and it's certainly none in Alabama that I'm currently, you know, retained by, and it's certainly not the AG's office or not the First Circuit. But I have seen now they will massage the evidence to kind of make it what they want. Some, and I've also seen law enforcement misrepresent the evidence. Or in one case, they have lots of exculpatory evidence. They choose not to present that part. And I even had an expert, a highly sought after expert from your state, who is on a different side than I am in a civil case. And there was, you know, 5 or 6 untruths in an affidavit where a man sat in jail for 2 years. And, you know, I'm hired on the plaintiff side, and of course the agency is the defendant side. And his report basically said, as long as law enforcement tells more truth than lies, then it's a good faith thing. And I jumped all over that, Miss Brandy, and I don't know, certainly don't know how that's going to end, but I wasn't taught that way. If you've got lies, it doesn't have to be inclusive evidence, but if there's something exculpatory and you know about it, because the magistrates, the judges, the summary court judges, they don't know. So I think the way people put their head down at night is they think, I'm not making this decision, and all I have to do is be more probable than not to take this to court. And true, if the evidence is all legitimate evidence, that is our standard, and it's a wonderful system and probably the best in the world. But I don't think the framers of our system thought about that evidence. And, I don't know that there's even a word for it other than misconduct or lack of integrity when there's something out there. Even though you may have inclusive evidence, there's something out there that probably would change that judge's mind, and you just conveniently leave it out, you don't consider it, or you massage it and make it something it's not.
Yeah. Do you think that that's something that they could be doing in this case? Like if the trooper is not well enough educated or equipped to be able to make this, make this work, he's basically taking what he has and trying to kind of, I think Alan Jackson said trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. But do you think that that's kind of what it is, that he feels like it's out of his hands and he's just doing this because he has to come up with an answer?
Certainly, I do. And I truly think that is one of the major issues here. They decided early on, and like I said, Miss Brandy, I'm not saying Karen Reed is even innocent. I don't even need to get to that part. Mm. I'm appalled that this made it all the way to the jury. Mm-hmm. I really thought that, once again, some actor in this other than the defense, because they can't do this part, would stand up and say, wait a minute, we've got an issue. But like I said, the way they sleep at night, they say, well, this is the system. And the judge said, we've got probable cause. Now, we didn't tell them about those 7 other things because we don't have to. But I believe early on they had a theory. Everyone jumped on it. We've gone too far now to back up. And that's where I said an honest peer review process, and maybe even a blind peer review process, would have uncovered 70-75% of these problems, and could have salvaged it, or at least if it's not salvageable, and if it's just the wrong thing to do, somebody make the decision to, because you got a victim, you got a victim's family, and they definitely deserve justice. But doing it the wrong way is, it's wrong. It's not the right thing to do, and it's not what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. Do you think that getting the papers from the feds where he had, because the prosecutor had access to all of the ARCA papers as well, do you think that after he saw that, he should have changed some of that before the trial?
Certainly. And
have you ever seen that happen?
I have. If you check out South Carolina versus Epps, that is one of the cases I was involved in. And I knew nothing coming in this case. My client, I was retained for the defense. And Epps, I'm not even saying he's a good dude. I don't know him. I've seen him one time in my life in the courtroom. And he's not my client. He's my client's client. So I take and analyze a death that's on video, and I showed them, it's not like I got a special power. I just learned how to interpret video, and I showed them 4 or 5 other shooters that they never considered. And in my opinion, that decedent was shot by his own guys. And I'm not saying that Epps didn't deserve to go to prison. I'm not saying he didn't do anything wrong. I'm saying he didn't commit a murder on this night. And that was on a Friday when the guilty verdict come out. And on Monday, it hit the media that the FBI had given the prosecutor, and we're just talking 6 months ago, had given the prosecutor some information that same thing I gave them. And I promise you, I didn't talk to the FBI. And the prosecutors or whatever had held that evidence tight and not provided it to the defense. So that gentleman's going to get, an appeal eventually. But that probably made me more sick to the stomach than any case I've ever worked on. And certainly not because I had a connection to the defendant. But it was just wrong. It was wrong. And I knew what happened and I showed the jury what happened. But I guess they gave a vote, they gave that doubt to the law enforcement. And that's the way it goes sometimes also.
Yeah. I want to talk about the shoe coming off. Now, I know that you've done pedestrian strikes before, and the shoe coming off is something that is common in pedestrian strikes. One of the things that they talked about, the ARCA experts, though, they said that the shoe coming off of John would not have happened in a sideswipe type of collision, though, because there would not be enough force, because the shoe coming off comes from the force. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I don't know much about it other than just the two
Certainly,
sides of it.
I anticipated that. Generally, you're correct with the force, but it's actually friction. So shoes are usually ejected due to the friction and any movement, of the victim itself. This pedestrian vehicle contact, if that's what it is, I don't believe it would create enough force or friction to do that. And once again, it's where the person is struck. Had Mr. O'Keefe been struck down low really, really fast, maybe, the momentum of feet going overhead could have ejected those shoes, but I wouldn't really expect it here. And I've had some troopers tell me, in almost every crash I've worked, and I just find that hard to believe. I think it matters the type of shoe, certainly that friction, and then how did the decedent or the victim react after they were hit? If they went down, why would their shoes be ejected? Or if they had a double impact and went over the vehicle, I could see it. Or certainly if they were hit and projected down the road in the same direction as the force. But I wouldn't expect that here. Could happen, maybe not. I mean, if he's in some slides or, sandal type shoes, but I know it's very, very cold when this happened. That is a little suspect to me. And I would have to have an answer for that also, because I'm usually wearing boots, especially when it's nasty or cold. But at the bare minimum, athletic type shoes are not going to come off that easy unless you're older like me and, you got the ones with the Velcro. I'm just kidding. But, but they don't come off that easy. And it takes a lot of force to do it. And once again, we're not talking about that much force in this suggested vehicle versus pedestrian accident.
Gotcha. The DNA was one thing that they brought up a couple times. The DNA, because his DNA was found on the outside of the taillight housing, so like on the exterior of the taillight. That is something that the prosecutor brought up as proof that or evidence toward him being struck. But the ARCA experts did point out that it was his DNA, but it was not blood or tissue, and it was only on the exterior. So what are your thoughts on that? If this happened the way that they said it happened, with it busting on him and then going across his arm, what, as far as DNA goes, what would you expect to see on there?
Well, we're obviously talking about some form of touch DNA, because there's no body fluids, no lipids, no skin. I mean, no visible skin. And I asked myself, touch DNA is great. I remember when I first got into crime scene work, you had to have a teaspoon of blood to get a complete profile. And now, you can walk in a room and sneeze and you can contaminate the whole room. So it certainly has gone a long way, but it's not without its problems either. Partial profiles usually with touch DNA, and not very strong numbers. When you look at the ratios, it's very, very fragile. And think about this, Miss Brandy. he'd ridden in that vehicle. He'd ridden in that vehicle on the passenger side.
Mm-hmm.
Who you can't age it. Who's to say, his DNA probably would be expected to be on that vehicle. If he did any maintenance to it, or, because of the weather, he wiped it down, he did anything. I don't believe that's very strong. And, it really, I don't know, it doesn't mean a lot to me.
Mm-hmm.
Juries like to hear it, but I know enough about DNA to be dangerous, but when you look at the percentages, it's not really, really strong. So I don't know. Is it his? Is it not his? How did it get there? When did it get there? You don't know. And I believe that's an unanswered question that I don't think any DNA analyst can answer. And of course, you use it with other pieces of evidence to get a totality. And to me, that still doesn't change my mind about there being some major issues here.
Yeah. One thing too is the hair. I don't think that's something I didn't ask you about before, but the hair that stayed on the car, when they did the original testing, they said there was no human DNA on it, but and then they did the mitochondrial testing and said that they were able to get a profile that matched John O'Keefe. But that's something that I noticed there was a lot of debate about too, because not only about the hair staying on the car after driving 60 miles or whatever it was, and then coming, being towed back, 60 miles back. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that the hair could stay on there, or how would it stay on there?
Well, a couple things, and going back to the DNA for just a moment, he's got on a shirt. I don't know if he had on a jacket, if they presented those clothing in
just
trial.
The hoodie.
Okay, just the hoodie.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it this way. Striking his arm, the DNA doesn't jump through garments. So, that's another thing too. And a single hair. I mean, you and I live in areas of the country where we have a lot of deer strikes.
Mm-hmm.
And I've probably hit more than my share, but I don't recall ever seeing a single hair. It's usually a lot of hair or a lot of body fluids. Then again, he got out of the passenger side. No one ever said he didn't ride in that vehicle. We're constantly shedding skin, cells, hair daily. I don't know that means a lot to me. And if someone planted that, they really didn't do their research, but I'm not saying it happened or it didn't happen, but not a lot in that. It's replicated, and it's a numbers game when you're doing mitochondrial. So, what does it really mean? If they said he'd never seen this vehicle, never ridden in this vehicle, I'd say, wow, that is really a smoking gun. But what does it really mean?
Yeah. And that's the thing too, when I've hit deer before, it's not one hair, it's
Right.
a clump, and it's usually attached to, like some piece of like blood or tissue. It's not, I've only hit a deer twice, but neither time was there a lone hair that was on the car. It was,
And another thing, and I noticed that I left it out. I've actually got it written down. Touch DNA can transfer. And one of your readers brought that up. One of your customers brought that up, and that is true. First time I heard that, a DNA analyst was challenged. Couldn't someone have taken so and so's DNA and then deposited here, not on purpose, but inadvertently? And the answer from any qualified DNA analyst is going to be certainly that there is a possibility that can happen. So if they didn't change gloves, if they collected anything on the vehicle, there's always that possibility. But my thing is, what does it mean? He got out of the vehicle.
Right. And there was other DNA on there too. It wasn't even just his. He wasn't the only DNA profile that was on there. So I think, again, that even waters down that as evidence more, I think.
Exactly. And you're talking about the public. Not that anyone has a right to your vehicle in the public, but we call that the public area of the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, it's outside. And if the public can deposit their DNA there, certainly if you've got access to it and you're in a relationship with the owner, it wouldn't shock me to find, his DNA there. I don't think that proves anything or disproves anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. What about, let's talk a little bit about, because one of the big things in this is the lack of injuries and the lack of damage to the car. So the lack of injuries, I want to start there. With everything being pretty, on just his arm, and then of course the head. He had the one contusion above his eye, but for the most part, everything was pretty isolated to just those two spots. So, with the lack of injuries, can you talk a little bit about that with the different things that they gave in their theory about the being projected and the rolling or tumbling, however he would have, if he was airborne at one point and then hit the ground and rolled or tumbled to final resting spot, the things that you would expect to see versus what we did see?
Generally, Miss Brandy, when someone is made airborne or ejected, you're going to see the clothing bunched up. You're going to see soil. You're going to see grass. You're going to see other things that are not just on that clothing, but they're actually trapped in that clothing. And if you think it's kind of like dragging someone, and you've heard that when a victim is drugged by a person into the woods, their pants will come down, or depending on which way you're dragging them, their shirt will come up. Same thing here. However the force is and however he was ejected when he hits, a skilled investigator should be able to look at that and tell that's what happened. I said from day one, looking at, and it's no disrespect meant to any of the dog handlers. It's no disrespect meant to any of the ones that sent me the information. I'm sorry, or a nurse. That does not, and I could be wrong. I could be 180 degrees wrong. Those injuries were not caused by a canine. Those injuries, if you look, I believe Mr. O'Keefe's arm was completely bent up when he sustained those injuries, and a lot of them match up. They are a continuation of the other injury. And unfortunately, the medical legal death investigators or whoever attended his post-mortem did not bend his arms and see what they could match up of those injuries. But it could be anything. I mean, it could be a badger or a grizzly bear or anything else, but it doesn't look like a canine injury. And I know they had a nurse that said, that's 100% canine injury. Well, I don't give tetanus shots. And, I also know some investigators that think they know things about tires, but most of the general public doesn't know. You look at your tire and all of your tread looks the same. Well, when the weather gets nice again, go outside with a measuring device and measure your tread on your vehicle tires, and you're going to find out that there's a sequence and there are multiple sizes. That's called noise treatment. But I've had people argue me, with that and say, oh, no, they're all the same. I give them the measuring stick. They go look at it and they're like, I never knew that. Well, unless you're trained to compare known to an unknown, then this might look like a canine injury to you, but it doesn't look like any canine injury I've seen. And it's all on one side, and I believe one to be a continuation of the other, but obviously they didn't even consider that. And if they would have put it together, they might have figured out what that pattern injury was caused by, even if it wasn't caused by this accident. But they never considered that.
Do you think that it would be consistent with a snowplow? Because that's been one of the things too, is that people have talked about when Higgins left, if his plow could have somehow hit John and caused that scraping.
I wouldn't have any idea, Miss Brandy, but I'm going to tell you that would cause enough friction, either with an appendage on that snowplow or with the ground. That could be enough friction to cause these injuries. Not saying it happened. And Lord, please, y'all don't throw rocks at that poor guy I saw testifying that drives that snowplow, because I don't know. But if you don't find it on the vehicle, then I believe I'd go check everything else out too.
Right.
Until, I can eliminate enough things, because a snowplow, it's not going to crack a tail lens. A snowplow is probably not going to get a dent in it. And if you could figure out the mechanics of that, or the areas that could have possibly come in touch with Mr. O'Keefe, and he could have been down already. I mean, without casting blame, I don't know how seriously they ever considered that or any other ideas.
Yeah. What about the lack of damage to the car? The things that you would expect to see if he had been hit hard enough to project him back the way that they said?
I saw none of it. I saw no damage that would, Mr. O'Keefe was my size, a little bit taller. I don't see it. I just do not see damage. A tail lens is not going to do it. And I know because, I've got a couple little dings in my new truck, and it doesn't take a lot to dent the metal that's on the trucks now. Most of them are aluminum. I just don't see it, Miss Brandy. And I wish I could give an answer, but at 20 miles an hour, if you back your SUV up and I just hold my fist out, there's going to be a dent in your vehicle, and it's not here. So that tells me it's got to be lower than the bumper, if at all.
Gotcha. Do you know anything? And this isn't a question that I've asked you before, but I've been trying to research on this Searle theory, the throwing pedestrian throw theory, and because I had never heard of that before. And from everything that I've been able to find, I've been looking at studies on this all day. This is what I've been spending my day doing for the episode. But I've been looking at it, and everything that I found, all these studies are saying that it's not very accurate. And it was basically made to determine the speed that a car is going when it hits a pedestrian who has been projected out. But everything that I've found on it has said that it's not very reliable, and I also saw a study that said it's predominantly used when a car hits, when the front of a car hits a pedestrian, and the pedestrian, I forget what it's called, something wrap, where if it hits them in the legs and their legs buckle and they've come forward and like over the dash or not the dash, over the hood, that's predominantly what it's used for.
And that's that secondary impact I was talking about, when it hits you low and then you hit the vehicle. No, ma'am, I have heard it. I'm not really familiar with it at all. I would just, throw caution to it. If it was something that was proven, I believe it would be used all the time, because this science hasn't changed much since the 30s and 40s. So I wouldn't put a lot of faith in it myself. I would probably go back to the methods that have proven time and time again, that work.
Yeah. I feel like that was another them trying to make something work that wasn't working by using calculations that don't calculate.
Yeah.
So overall, what do you think about Trooper Paul? I know that part of me has, I struggle with this because I have felt really sorry for him, and I know that he has somebody's life on the line, so it's I know that people tell me I shouldn't feel sorry for him because he's testifying to things that he shouldn't be testifying to, and I agree with that, but overall his lack of confidence in his answers and the things that he was saying and how he wasn't able to really explain them or back anything up, that was really frustrating and hard to watch. But overall, what did you think about Trooper Paul?
Well, can I give you some general before I give you overall?
Oh, yeah.
I believe he had terrible projection. And look, everybody gets nerves. My first, getting through the qualifications is my worst part, when they're examining you on your qualifications, because I always forget something or get something jacked up. but he had terrible projection. I mean, he was in dire need of his Xanax, bad,
Yeah.
and stuttering and drawing it out, and you could tell he wanted to be anywhere but there. And then what got me is his opinions as to the mirrors, the backing, the ways people operate their vehicle. I thought that was a very, very big stretch.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't know what would qualify you to do that. Uh, and I tell attorneys on the stand all the time, I believe you probably need to ask someone else about that, because that's a little bit beyond my scope. And unless he's can read the tea leaves, or unless he's a driving instructor and he sits in a vehicle with teenagers and he sees multiple people driving that way, I don't know how he could come up with that. Like I said, I think he got the part right about the possibility of a counterclockwise rotation. Matter of fact, that's the only way it could work on that side if it was a side swipe injury. I don't know. I wasn't very much impressed by him, but I was even more angry at his supervisors and his coworkers, probably his agency, their policies and procedures, because he should not have been on the stand. Some people just get nervous.
Hmm.
I learned how to talk in church, and there's no objection they can say in a courtroom that bothers me, because I was forced to get up in front of the church and talk. And, you got little ladies with blue hair that will really tell you the truth about how they feel. So
Yeah.
that part doesn't bother me, but what you do is repetition. And here we were fortunate enough here at SLED, we went to the national, what is it called? The NAC, the Victim Center up in Columbia, right at University of South Carolina, National Advocacy Center. And we would go, and they've got courtrooms down both sides of the hallway, and they really don't care about why you're there. But you go from one courtroom to the next courtroom to the next courtroom, and you testify on the same set of facts. And you're training baby attorneys. And that is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And I'm sure that's a federal thing, so every state has it. That'll do a lot for your confidence.
Hmm.
When you do it over and over and over and over, and maybe next month you'll go do it again. I felt a little sorry for him, but I felt a little bit of anger towards his coworkers and supervisors.
Yeah. One thing that people keep asking too is about the bruising. So going back to the side swipe thing, even if it was a side swipe, and I know we've said like most everything goes against that being the case, but if it were the case, would you also expect to see bruising on that?
Probably so. You think if he had enough distance from the vehicle that he didn't have enough force to cause a bruise, would we be here? Would it have been enough to propel him? You got to have the friction, and you got to have that contact of that large area. No matter how big it was, you got to have that area contact with the vehicle. And I just don't think we would be here if that's what it was. You'd have a busted mirror, and he would have a superficial wound. And as suggested, we started this thing off tonight. If his arm was out, then you'd probably have a real nasty break, but he'd be standing up holding it, and he wouldn't have been projected across this yard.
Yeah. The taillight pieces too. Somebody asked about the taillight pieces. So the prosecutor kept saying microscopic pieces of taillight embedded in his clothing. So I was expecting to hear more about that in the trial, but when the DNA analyst spoke, they said, or maybe it wasn't the DNA analyst, it was whoever processed it. They said that they didn't actually say anything about it being embedded. So this is something I had a question about too. They said that they took all of the loose things from the clothing and, any hairs or if they saw anything like that. And then they take like basically kind of like a metal spatula and scrape it to see if there's anything else that comes off of it. And then all of that was put together in a bag. Now, one of the questions that that, or one of the pieces of evidence, I guess, that we've heard that one of the jurors was hung up on was this taillight that was embedded in the clothes. But if all of this was in the same, the chain of custody, I guess, or how everything was separated has kind of been in question, of course, like everything else in this case. So, what are your thoughts on that? If it did swipe him on the arm, would you expect those taillight pieces to be? I don't know how to explain that kind of break and that being inside the clothing, especially with the ARCA doctors saying that the way that it was fractured looks like it was fractured from a small, the way that the fracture pattern is, it looks like it was fractured from a small area, or a small object, I should say. So if that's the case, then how would there have been, what do you think about the taillight?
Well, I think it's got to be one or two things, Miss Brandy. They're talking about microscopic traces of that. I don't believe we have enough here to make anything microscopic. And the technicians and the scientists at SLED were real good about evidence processing. And they would, like you said, they would scrape it, and then they would come back with a tape-like object, a clear tape-like object, and they would hit every square inch. And then, of course, affix it to some type of backer where it could be analyzed. I don't see now. Certainly, I'm not into the clothing thing, and I'm certainly not the kind of scientist that would examine microscopic particles of a tail light. But I don't believe it was a lot of clarity in that either. And right. the photos they were showing with the court, were big fragments. Like I have seen when someone walks out in front of a vehicle. And you look at the artifacts that are left after the tow truck driver takes the vehicle and leaves with it. 100 miles an hour, maybe, vehicle on vehicle, maybe. I don't see it at a 20 mile an hour crash. I don't see it.
Yeah. And one of the things they said too with the, the clothes were on the hospital floor, on the ambulance floor, and they were put all together in a bag and then laid out to dry and left to dry in the evidence area for however long. I can't remember, I have it in my notes, but however long before it was actually put in the secure area after it was dried. I mean, it was a long
if they don't use sterile backer board and all that evidence isn't placed in a sterile environment, and it's just in a general environment where they may have processed evidence from a 100-mile-an-hour crash, how could you have faith in that evidence anyhow? Because of Locard's principle and, the exchange principle and the fact that you probably could have cross-contaminated it.
Yeah. The cross-contamination, speaking of that, I want to talk for a second about the Solo cups and the Stop and Shop bags. What did you think when you heard about Solo cups and Stop and Shop bags being used as the way that they collected the evidence?
A lot of times, Miss Brandy, and I'm not even going to put that on those investigators. I have had patrol officers, they would have rocks. They'd go get rocks out of the ditch and put it by the shell casings. So I've seen Solo cups, the yellow ones. They've used the yellow ones a lot. They'll take a magic marker and write a number on it, because we have yellow placards. Mm-hmm. So, they want to feel part of the team. I've seen them do that. I've seen one take $1 bill and put it by a piece of evidence. Well, the only problem with that is your crime scene examiners probably going to find 90% of the evidence themselves. They need to document it. Believe it or not, every dollar bill is not the same length. So it doesn't help you as far as a scale is concerned if it's photographic evidence. A rock, no common size. Mm-hmm. You'd be better if you put a quarter down next to it than a dollar bill. I don't know. I always tell them, look, please don't add anything to my crime scene, but they're going to do it anyhow. It's nothing you're going to be able to do about it because when you get there an hour after it happened, they're going to have everything there: rocks, dollar bills, solo cups, anything they can have to mark that evidence. And they feel like they're helping, and but they could be cross-contaminating. So, it's bad. It's a bad thing, but they're doing it for a good reason.
Well, see, on this one, when they collected the blood drops, they didn't just mark it with the solo cups. They collected
it in the solo cups.
In the solo cups, and that was one thing that I was curious about too, because I don't, with Canton Police Department being so close, because it's only, a hop, skip, and a jump from where the scene was. So I know that Canton Police Department does not investigate unattended deaths. Like, that's turned over to state police, and so I do understand that. I guess what's hard for me is understanding how some things that seem like it should have been easy enough for them to just, with them being so close, to be able to, and because they had people who were on scene already or who were at Canton Police Department and were coming on scene. I feel like I don't understand how they couldn't have had somebody bring stuff to do it properly.
Well, I agree with you, but I mean, in a pinch, I would feel better about a new solo cup than I would one that you've used on the last 5 crime scenes. And we've used paint cans from Lowe's, lined paint cans, for liquid evidence, but I certainly wouldn't use it for a garment with a semen stain from a death scene, involving a sexual assault. So I guess you've got to know where to draw the line. You got to look, is that comparable evidence? Can it be cross-contaminated? I mean, I have used a sterile gauze pad before because I ran out of droppers or I ran out of swabs. And you go to your first aid kit and, glove up and use a sterile gauze pad to collect a blood sample. And you got to consider that, and it needs to be sterile. Like I said, I think in a pinch, that's okay. I'm not an advocate for it, but I think it's okay. But if you tell me, these are the ones we brought from the cookout and I had them in my truck, then I've probably got a problem with it.
Yeah. So if the injuries were, and I know that you said based on your experience that you didn't think they were from an animal attack. If they were from an animal attack, would somebody wanted to know, would it be possible, would there be any DNA on the actual wounds to be able to test, and not from the clothing? Because that was one of the questions that they had. The clothing, the no canine DNA thing came from a couple of swabs that they did on the clothing near the wounds, but there were 2 swabs done, but we don't exactly know where, and it was on the clothing. So that was one of the questions that's come up a lot. Would it have been possible for them to do swabs of the actual injuries to get any kind of canine DNA?
Certainly. Just like, they take your nails, they'll either, do scrapings under your nails, a possible sexual assault victim, they'll do the scrapings, or a lot of times they'll just take the nails. And yeah, absolutely they could have, because, once Mr. O'Keefe expired, it would have had to have been done within a relative close time. I'm saying a couple hours maybe before they started trying to work him and do medical intervention. And I understand that, he possibly, according to some reports, he was alive for some time at the hospital. So, I mean, you always risk losing that DNA because it's fragile. And of course, saving his life is more important than solving the crime. So, it could have been done. Am I mad at them because they didn't do it? Probably not. Where you have a deceased victim that dies right there and the DNA is not going anywhere as long as somebody doesn't disturb it. But it's like GSR evidence on a living victim. They're going to put IVs in their hands. They're going to clean their hands up, whatever. And of course, that destroys your evidence. But yeah, you could certainly get DNA out of a wound or around a wound.
Yeah. Somebody had asked too about the blood, with the head injury being how they described it. you would expect to see more blood loss. And that's one of the things that people have questioned a lot too, is that with there being so little explanation on where the blood went.
Yeah, I mean that's always going to be suspect, and I don't know, was it internal damage, or could it have been a bloodletting? You don't know. Did they just miss it? Miss Brandy, I'm gonna tell you that's another part that kind of disturbed me a little bit, especially if this is a law enforcement officer, because police do stupid things when fellow law enforcement officers get killed and you let emotions take over. But picnic tents, a couple picnic tents could have been put right there, cover it up, put the panels up, kerosene heaters, blowtorch, whatever could have been used to work that down layer from layer. And that's real easy for me to say. Like I said, I've only worked one major incident in ICE in my whole career. But had I needed to do that, I believe even, 15, 20 years ago, I would have thought, wait a minute, we got to cover this. And now we got to figure out a way to melt this ice, because you got one chance to grab it. You got one chance to grab it where there's no questions about the integrity of the evidence. And I don't know that you could have run me off if a law enforcement officer was found dead there. I mean, I probably would have called in the boys to bring me some tents.
Yeah.
And I don't think we'd have done it with, we wouldn't have done it with a blower. We would have sifted through everything there. We've done it with dirt. We've done it with sand. I don't know that it would be that different doing it with snow.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that's something that just blew my mind when I heard it, when they said that they told the Canton police officers, who were supposed to be recused from this, they told the Canton police officers, oh yeah, just drive by there. And if you see anything, as the snow's melting. And so they have, they call it undocumented searches, basically, from when, some of the officers were driving by and from a moving car saw pieces of taillight that were then called into question or then brought in as evidence. And that to me blew my mind, to have them say, oh yeah, just if you're driving by, just, check it out and see if there's any more evidence. Because to me, it's like you said, that completely destroys the integrity of the evidence.
And remember, Miss Brandy, it doesn't take the whole department. All it takes is one officer to do something dirty. No matter what it's in the interest of, it's dirty if you're fabricating evidence. And then everyone else trusts that officer, and they jump on in support of he or she. And now you have got a mess. And, I don't point fingers at the whole agency, because nationwide, 99 point something % of our law enforcement officers are wonderful. We can't do without them. But a certain percentage of our population's bad people. I probably got some in my family that I'm not really proud of, but everybody's got that one cousin. But if our law enforcement comes from our population, why would we be surprised when we get some bad ones? I mean, if you look at it, you ought to get some bad ones if they're coming from your population. So it doesn't take but one. And, I think we're all guilty of probably putting our faith in someone that didn't deserve it at some point in time in our life. And that's all it takes, is some good intentions and putting your faith in someone that doesn't deserve it, but you haven't seen that side, and it's thrown the whole investigation off.
Yeah. So what, if this were your scene, how would you have tried to go about it? I mean, obviously, other than not releasing the scene to, just hopefully drive by later and see more pieces of taillight, but with the way that the injuries were, and the way that, and especially the lack of injuries, and the damage to the car and that type of stuff, you're an expert. But if this were your scene, and let's say you didn't have all of the, tons of experience that you have and stuff like that, how should this have been handled? Number
one, that they would have vacated that residence. If I had the first responders, and I think some of them said that there was an utterance made by Karen. if that truly happened, or if I had information that happened, we are going to treat it like a homicide until the investigation tells us it's an accident. You can't, once you take it one direction, it's hard to back up and do the other thing. You know, whether we have to call our victims advocates and get hotel rooms for everyone, that vehicle, I mean, that home, that vehicle, and that immediate area is going to be ours by way of a search warrant until we can either include or exclude those folks. And, you know, the occupants of the home or law enforcement, they should have understood that. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I didn't hurt this young man. Go ahead and investigate me, dig long, deep, and continuous. And once you get me eliminated, I know then you can go look for the real person. But I know how it works because I've been in law enforcement. And that should have been done. That should have been done. And the phone, the changing phones. I don't think we've talked about that. But let me get back one thing. My mind runs in a million different directions. We would have controlled that home, that yard, that curve, and everyone's going to talk to us, or either they're going to tell us they're not talking to us. One way or the other, it's going to be documented, so I know where to go back to when it's over. We're going to treat that as 3 separate crime scenes, and when we eliminate it, then I can tell the naysayers, look here, we processed that house. It did or it didn't happen in there, but we're going to knock that part out. And then all the evidence is going to be documented, and it's not going to all be on the shoulders of one person. We're going to have some people who are there strictly to observe, give advice, and document. And everybody hates that job. That job sucks. But you're going to have somebody walking around with an evidence bag and a Sharpie and an evidence log, and we're going to log it. And then we're going to take it down layer by layer. You know, never done it in the ice, done it with a lot of missing persons where you find remains. It's a pain. When it's 100 degrees outside, it's bad. And I imagine when it's 5 degrees outside, it's bad. But they have to compare to one another. And if you're going to work for that victim, you got to go home, go home. Post a sentry on that property, go home, come back tomorrow. Your search warrant's still good as long as you didn't vacate the property.
Yeah. And, you know, they said that they didn't think that they had enough for a search warrant. So I disagree with that. Of course, I'm not law enforcement. So you tell me, well, I guess you just did tell us there was enough for a search warrant for that. I would think so, having a dead cop in your yard.
I would think, how could you not have enough, you know, when a deceased person is lying in the middle of your area? If not, you haven't lost anything. Then you knock on the door and you talk to the homeowner. You know, I don't like to depend on a consent, but if you can't get a search warrant, consent's the next best thing. So I'm going to try to get consent. And then if that doesn't happen, at least I can show good faith while I'm taking over this property and I have no legal right to do so. Right. And then we got to go through the courts and they got to determine if what I did was, you know, acceptable or not. But you really got a problem with your judicial system if you can't get a search warrant for a dead person in the middle of your scene.
Yeah. And then you started to talk about the phones. Tell me your thoughts on the phones.
Oh, Miss Brandy. I am the Leroy Jethro Gibbs flip phone kind of guy. And, you know, my wife, against my wishes, went and bought me the, you know, smartphone. And once you've got it for a little while, you really can't do without it. Yeah. You know, checking your emails and sending invoices. I use the camera because the camera is just as good as my Nikon. So a lot of times I'll use the camera just for general photographs. But I had to change carriers a while back, and it's a major deal now if you're, you know, going to change carriers. I mean, it took literally it took all day. And my biggest fear was I'm going to lose my tax information. I'm going to lose 1,900 contacts. I'm going to lose my data bank from my emails, so and so and so. I cannot accept that a person from an area with a lot more people than where I'm from got rid of his phone and dumped a bunch of stuff. I cannot I can't fathom that. A person in law enforcement, look, I've probably got some things in here that I do not feel comfortable talking about on the front pew in church.
Right.
But there's nothing here going to get me dead. There's nothing here going to get me in prison. And there's nothing there that's going to cause me to spoil evidence. So those are the only three things I could think I would destroy my phone. And then a lot of times that's useless. But I just can't believe that is the answer. If you didn't have a preservation order in your hand, you should have known one was coming.
Yeah.
And I didn't, that wasn't very believable in the testimony. And it was early on, but that wasn't very believable to me.
Yeah. Do you have, Marfetz wants to know, do you have a theory about what you think most likely happened to Officer John O'Keefe? I know we talked about this a little bit about how there nothing all points to one theory.
Right. And I think a little bit of all. I mean, it's highly probable, at least in my simple mind, that Karen did hit him, knock him down, not causing all the injuries. He got back up of his own force later and maybe walked to the home. Now, if that's a possibility, then why wouldn't it be a possibility he walked this way and got bumped by something else in the street? I believe she was ticked, and I don't let me and you talk. I didn't want to tell you what I really think of her because I don't think we get to that point. But that being said, I don't think she intended to kill him. If that's what happened, I truly believe it happened, and she was mad and she was hateful, and whatever. I mean, he could have been a mad, hateful person too. You don't know.
Right.
But I believe that a little bit of a lot of different theories fit this, but not all in this nice bow-tied box that the prosecution presented.
See, I think that's been my hardest thing from the beginning, because I kept thinking like, okay, well, the easiest explanation would be that she hit him. That would be just the easiest to explain everything. But then with all of the problems with that and all of the issues with the injuries versus the damage to the car and all of the issues with the investigation, all of the issues with everything, my struggle has always been that I don't necessarily believe every single part of the defense's theory, and I don't believe every single part of the prosecution's theory. And because everything was done so poorly and so many things don't add up, I feel like we're never really going to know exactly what happened, and because nothing points all to one thing. There's different options that I could think maybe this could have happened, maybe that could have happened, but nothing points to all one thing. So I think, which is reasonable doubt. I mean, that's what reasonable doubt is. If there's, if things don't, if there seems to be the other reasonable explanations, but that's been one of the hardest things for me.
Oh, me too, Miss Brandy. And I believe in my heart of hearts that I believe that it don't matter what the defense thinks. I mean, they don't have to prove it. And I'm not saying that an attorney can tell a story, but they kind of get a pass to spin it the way, if they don't know it for sure, they can spin it in a way that gives their client, not me, not the one who's retained by them, but the attorney themselves can certainly present what they want to present. As long as it's not a total lie, they can, spin it. But when you can't establish a strong theory and a strong cause of death and a strong reason for it, I don't believe the defense is even required to anything.
Right.
And I believe that's what we had here. And someone asked about the ARCA earlier. They are a reputable company. I have no reason to doubt them. They do things that I don't do, and vice versa. But they pretty much usually have it down. Those engineers have it down now. They can't tell you you're 5'2" or 4'2" or whatever, gray and 4'2", and you're shooting. I don't believe they can really do that, but that is a reputable company, and I have no reason to doubt them.
Yeah. This person wants to know, how do you feel about the CERT versus CSI searching, and would it have made a difference?
May have, and it's different. There's certainly different methods to employ, and I probably would have tried it all. I would have done some gritting. Like I said, I would have found some type of cover and tried to generate some heat to melt that ice, that snow. But we would not have left there, Miss Brandy, until we collected most everything. Now, you always go back to that crime scene, you find a shell case and you missed.
Mhm.
And you just that's on you, big boy. You have to document it, collect it the same way, and then of course you got to tell the truth about it. And if the jury believes it, they believe it. If they think you were walking around with a pocket full of shell casings, well, then you're just SOL. So that's part of it. But I've said many times, I've never worked a perfect crime scene, and certainly I've missed evidence. Certainly. I towed in a burnt vehicle one time with a deceased lady in it, and had no idea. We collected 2 or 3 burnt vehicles insurance jobs every night. Looked in, didn't see anything. That wasn't the case, but you feel terrible about it. But I didn't go out there and take her remains out of that vehicle and bury them somewhere because I was scared I was going to be embarrassed. And it made me the best searcher of burnt vehicles in the world. After that, I carried a little golf club around with me, and I was still living at home then. I wasn't married. Took my little colander out of my mama's house, and I'd sift through it. And I was the best at towing in a burnt vehicle. So sometimes when they're called on the carpet or when their shortcomings are exposed, it makes a law enforcement officer better.
Yeah. Do you think that could be the case in this? Do you think that there will be changes with as hard as Trooper Paul's testimony was to get through and to hear, and with all the things that were so easily debunked by it? Do you think that this could be a point of them changing some of their process and some of their how they go about handling stuff like this?
Well, they certainly could change their approach. I don't know what the rules, I don't know what the rules are there in Massachusetts, if they could open it back up, rework it. I don't know how that works there. But if if they put that trooper back on the stand, it's going to end up even worse next time without some type of intervention and some type of further investigation and maybe even a new theory. He is, I don't know that you can salvage that. I don't know. I hope for him. I pray for him. Bless his heart. I think he was just put in a position, and it might have been his fault. It might not have been, but I feel terrible for him. And but that wasn't right, and it's certainly not right to put someone in jail. Civil's different. Civil, you're talking about a monetary penalty. I don't care if it's Al Capone. If you put them in prison the wrong way, you're taking someone's freedom. And I'm certainly not giving concessions to Karen Reed. I don't know this lady, but I do know that you got to do it the right way. And I don't think the trooper, I don't think for $100 bill, the trooper believed what he was talking about.
I don't either. Because you can tell in his lack of confidence when he's giving his answers, and and then when he's made to try to kind of explain or justify, when there's any kind of pressure put on his answers or how he got them, he was not confident in his answers at all. And I know some of that could be nerves. He even had to stop at one point and take a deep breath, but I think some of that was nerves, but a lot of that was just lack of confidence and believability in what he was saying, I think.
Well, Miss Brandy, even if I'm wrong, I'm gonna poke my chest out and I'm gonna say it with conviction. And Trooper Paul, he just wanted to be somewhere else. He did not want to be in that courtroom that day. And he and that defense attorney were not friends. And I don't believe they're ever going to be friends. But hopefully that's a valuable lesson. He can, he can modify the way he does business just a little bit. I know every time I walked out with my hat in my hand, it made me better at testifying, but it also made me a better police officer. And there were a lot of them that toasted me pretty good. And I like to think that, that's why I'm somewhat effective now, because I had those abrasions back then, and now, you know what not to do.
Yeah. Reality Check says there were two blood drops on his clothing. Thoughts on that? Oh, that was something that was interesting. The drops of blood on the clothing, as opposed to whatever else it would have been. I don't know, but that was something that I thought was kind of interesting too. And a drop of blood on the shoe, because that to me speaks gravity as opposed to projection.
Right. Nose, ear. I don't know. I don't think if he had on the hoodie, those injuries, I don't believe would saturate his hoodie, and you would have that gravity fed blood. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but if it did, there'd be evidence of it on the hoodie. So I would think nose, ears, maybe, lips, teeth. But that I would expect it. I mean, 2 or 3 drops of blood's not going to prove anything. If you've got projected blood on the vehicle, or you find it on the pavement, that's a little bit different, and that can take you back toward the source if you're working it correctly. But I don't know. You can, and that's why there was, the question about why didn't they search a bathroom in another famous case that we dealt with. Well, if you've got an unknown suspect, possibly, but if it's limited to the family, you're going to find that blood. You should expect to find blood on any of our clothing. I mean, we don't want to say that. I don't have any blood on my clothing. At any given time, you can shed blood, share blood, have blood anywhere, and a couple of drops doesn't bother me.
Yeah. Let me see. I know I missed a couple questions. I was trying to look at people's questions as they were coming, but I was also listening to you and I wasn't paying attention. Let's see. So shouldn't the defense have gotten an expert to raise doubts about the Commonwealth's narrative? I think we talked about that. Gravity, hard to explain, drops. Oh, the vomit in the boxers. So the vomit could have come from the head wound can make you sick, correct? The head wound. So that could have caused that. But the vomit was in the boxers. So that would be more than likely sitting up, right? Sitting up.
It would be. Yes, ma'am. Or, I mean, I'm not trying to sound funny, but if, earlier in the night, if he got sick and he don't want to project it everywhere, I've seen people pull their shirts out before, and it sounds disgusting, but I don't know. But if they can prove that's his, and then again, it could mean that at some point in time he was undressed. I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and throw part of the conspiracy out there, but I don't know enough about it to even say, what the situation with the clothing was. And I don't do clothing evidence processing unless they have, some type of impression on it or some type of defect on it. But I'd love to examine his clothing. I would love if somebody give me a free pass. I would suit up, and I'd love to examine his clothing and just see for myself what I believe happened, because that'll tell you a lot of the story.
Yeah. Okay, where is this? I'm pretty sure that the medical examiner said that head injury would have incapacitated him, so he wouldn't have set up, crawled, etc. So that is one thing that the medical examiner said, that it would have incapacitated him, which which I think we heard from a couple of them, but that's one of the things they said. So if that's the case, then that could be what you were saying about if he, if he got sick earlier, or before the head injury, if he did get incapacitated by that. See, I think what's hard about this one too is that we're hearing from different specialists who are saying different things. So, and I know that that's the way experts are, so we may be hearing from one expert who says this, is caused from this, and a different one that has a different opinion. And that's common in trials. But I think that's what has been so hard about this one too, is that it's so different on these in a lot of the different things, not only the data, but the experts, their opinions are so different on these, and it makes it hard to figure out what you're going to give more weight to.
Well, I'm shocked that pathologists, and this is no disrespect, I've got some friends that are pathologists, I'm shocked one would give that answer, because usually the answer is, could he have gotten up after? Well, it's possible. They can be completely decapitated. Could Kenny Kinsey get up from this pavement without his head and walk over here? Well, it's possible. That's usually the answer you're going to get from a pathologist. So I do think it's awful accommodating that a pathologist would say that. But then I'm going to say there's always exceptions to everything medical. Mm-hmm. Doctors say this person can't do this, couldn't have done this. Well, it's always an exception. So I don't know how much faith I would put in that. I've seen pathologists that are wrong. I've seen pathologists that were just a little bit wrong, and I've seen some that were totally wrong. I had one in Statesboro, Georgia, that called something a bite mark. And after I got up and scaled it with their photographs and explained what it was a hickey. It was 1 inch by 1 1/4 inches, but they had it blown up as big as a cantaloupe. And they put the medical professional back up in rebuttal at the end. And this doctor changed their testimony to mouth caused by the mark. Mark caused by the mouth. So it went from a bite mark to a mark caused by the mouth, and my testimony was in between. So I'm not going to say that a pathologist or a medical professional won't change their opinion. And I'm not saying they're always right. Just like I'll tell you, I may not always be right either, but I'm not going to intentionally tell you wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think you've answered most of my questions. I know I had a lot. I know I wanted your...
How about the crime lab? Because I see a lady that I've lived in Massachusetts my whole life. And, you and I were having that conversation earlier about the problems with the crime labs.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that documentary, they have that documentary about it too, how to fix a drug scandal, where it goes kind of into a little bit of detail about all that mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. when you're coming up with bogus results and you're sending people to prison, you're not testing your substrate. And, I think they said that this technician or this examiner was eyeing the material and coming up with a result. Well, that is recent. Like I said, I know of one back in the early 2000s. It doesn't take many of those incidents to have a pattern practice, and then you lose all faith. And from what I understand, people were put in prison. A lot of folks were put in prison because of one or two bad forensic scientists. So that just makes us all look terrible when that part happens. Yeah. Thankfully, I haven't dealt with any misconduct like that in my career, but I have heard of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, Dr. Kinsey, I appreciate you so much coming on here and taking time out to talk to me and answer my questions and let me pick your brain about hearing some different perspectives. I think one of the interesting things about this case is that with there being so many things that are conflicting, I really enjoy hearing how different people can interpret evidence, but especially someone like you who has so much experience and, with crime scene investigation and reconstruction and all that. So I very much appreciate you. And especially because I know that this case of all of them is one of the ones that, people don't like hearing opinions that are different from theirs. So
you're so correct, Miss Brandy, and I appreciate your viewers. And certainly I always appreciate when I'm invited on. And, this one here, I generally don't let these high profile true crime cases get to me, but, and usually I've got enough discipline. I will keep my mouth shut until, it's one way or the other. But, I was back and forth on this one too. So, it happens, and you want to root for the law enforcement officer, and then I don't think she makes it easy to really defend her. But like I said, I don't care who's sitting there. I care about the process, and I care that the process is fair. And, if one person does it wrong and everybody stands behind that one person, then the whole thing's tainted, and I hope they get some answers.
Yeah. Do you think that they will retry this with the same charges?
Maybe the same charges. I believe every time you go to court, it diminishes your chances of getting a conviction. I have had cases this severe that they go back with a lower charge, and it's just an incredible deal, and the defendant take it. So I don't know where we're going to go, but I'll tell you, they're going to have to change the way they do business because how did I say it before? No dog poop. If their evidence doesn't show guilt, they're not going to get a guilty verdict from a jury, because jurors are smart. They use real life situations and real life training to come up with their decisions.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much. And I guess if they do take it to trial again and we go through all this again, I'll be texting you again, picking your brain.
We'll do it again. And thank you again, Miss Brandy, and all your listeners. I thank you. You don't know how important this is. I've been off for a little while, on the podcast and off of television, really, really down to business. But I always appreciate the opportunity to come on, and I'm always here if you need me.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. Thank y'all for hanging out with us. I will see y'all next time.
I gotta go. I can't stick around here forever.
Everybody was wonderful. Everybody behaved. Everybody's always so nice to me.
Just love your channel. And
Goodbye, good people. Now, how the heck do I get out of here?